I stand here to celebrate my teacher. I call her Prof. Njeri Kinyanjui. She taught me way back around 2002 at the Institute for Development Studies, University of Nairobi. So this is a book we were to review and discuss, quite an interesting piece. But as I discuss or raise my points, around one or two on this book, Jerry, next time when we have a reprint of this book, we need a bit of decoloniality in the cover. Why am I saying that? This cover presents one side of the story. Because reading your book, like Dr. Felix has identified, I see something of a paradox. Here is a situation where Njeri's grandfather has been granted an opportunity to plant coffee. So Njeri's father, Njeri's family, community sees a lot of hope in coffee. Hope in terms of better income, better living standards. But then, years after producing coffee, what is it that they get in return? They are not my ones. What they see in return is disappointment. Now, compare that, and I think my colleague has spoken about it, to the consumer of coffee in Europe. What does coffee time look like? It's leisure. It's time to think. For Njeri, for grandfather, for aunt, and for uncle, it's time to put extra work. These two contradictions, I think, is a key message we get from this book. Does the situation hold up to now? I think Felix spoke about the political economy. I come from a coffee growing zone, and I completely relate very well with Njeri's story. The story remains. To the consumer, to the producer of coffee somewhere in Muranga, somewhere in, I don't know, in Meru, their coffee time is one of putting more and more labor with minimal returns, but other actors along the coffee value chain, they receive the highest value. But remember, who owns the coffee? It is the farmer. Who owns the greatest value? It is other actors in the value chain. And in the book, Njeri tries to associate some of the challenges that explain this situation. For example, what is the relationship in the global coffee value chain? But now, as I think I also pose a question. Yes, on one hand, there is the challenge of the global coffee value chain. But what are our own local institutions doing to better the experience of our coffee time? My answer, they are not doing as much. There are structural challenges that they are not addressing. Point number two I want to emphasize, which I think comes from this book, is the question of gender inequalities and the question of social justice. Yeah, I felt touched the way Njeri's aunt was buried. A Catholic, devoted Catholic, but then, unfortunately, there was no priest to bury the aunt. That's a story. It's a social justice issue. Of course, there are matters of faith there. But more importantly, Njeri documents who is providing labor in the coffee farms. Mostly it's women, mostly girls. But then, when money comes, who goes for the money? Who makes decision? It's men. Largely a men's crop. So there is a question, and I ask the question, has this situation changed fundamentally? To me, the answer is no. When we look at our agricultural, the rural setup, still, women and girls provide the bulk of the labor. How much value do they get in return? I think each of us can judge that. So there is a question of dignity, social justice around there. And then my final point I want to speak about, when I look at this particular book, you may think it's not written by an academic. Yet, Njeri combines academic rigor, but very simple language. harvesting knowledge that we take for granted. And to me, it does represent what I would call a piece in decolonizing methodologies, decolonizing knowledge. That when we look at coffee time, we can say knowledge is out there for scholars to go and harvest. The question is, how many of us have these skills to go and document this story? And it's important because it's telling the story of our people, using their poetry, using their language, and making it count at the global level. Then, when I look at coffee time again, are we helpless? To me, the answer is no. And I'll quote the last one particular section of this book where Njeri says, next time you enjoy a cup of coffee, stop and think about how more than 100 million people involved in the coffee growing industry have worked together to help you open your day. So as I conclude, from a producer point of view, a consumer point of view, an intermediary point of view, Njeri is inviting us to search for a win-win situation so that for the producer, they enjoy their coffee time. For the intermediary, they also have an opportunity to enjoy their coffee time. And for the consumer, so that they also enjoy their coffee time. And that's why I'm saying I would love to see in the next copy where we have the challenges of a coffee producer with their labor. Now here we only have the consumer. So that we have a win-win situation. Njeri, we celebrate you and thank you.